One. One. So I have other videos on the live. If you see the last one that's up there, it's a little bit over an hour. Everything is in there. We go on the regular videos. There's even a deeper one, 3.5 hours long. I'm sharing out the stream right now. This will be my last one for a while. I've reached my limit and I have no more left. The information is solid, as well as the broad conversations. There is no room for doubt. You can go buy a piece of equipment and test. So I'm going to make some coffee and get into the grok chat later. I might as well play something from Environmental Health Trust. I did it in the last live that I did. But we'll go with the influence on self-com industry. This will at least give us a good base on what is factual and what is not.
On to advisory boards. All that said, that's resulted in, I think, the message coming across from the mainstream media, frankly, that cell phones are safe enough, shall we say. However, that point of view took a major hit just last week. The night before we released our story, there was a peer review by independent scientists of the biggest study that the United States government has had to date on cell phone radiation. This was a study by the U.S. National Toxicology Program. That's part of the National Institutes of Health. The study was commissioned by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and released some preliminary findings in February. And then those findings were peer reviewed by independent scientists last week. And those independent scientists finally concluded that there was, quote, clear evidence, unquote, clear evidence that cell phone radiation can cause cancers. And notably, those independent scientists upgraded the confidence level of that and other findings by this National Toxicology Program. So what that seemed to do was to confirm the suspicions by outsiders that the National Toxicology Program brass, the people up at the top, were trying to downplay this study because it was the very same data that had been released in 2016. And when that data was released in 2016, it came with a public health warning by the National Toxicology Program. Then in 2018, and back in February, they tried to downplay this. So it's very significant that last week, these independent scientists said, oh no, there is clear evidence here that cell phones can cause cancer. Now, before you all worry out there that you're having the equivalent of a cigarette habit, let me just say that the evidence is not yet definitive of how high the risk is for cancer, and genetic damage is another concern here. But it is definitely, it seems, a risk. If you look at the scientific data that is compiled by the National Institutes of Health, the actual studies that they catalog there, the vast majority of them do indicate that there are health impacts of this technology, of this radiation, I should say, according to Henry Lai, a professor at the University of Washington, who's analyzed all of this, and we talked with him in some detail. So there are things you can do. The main thing you can do as a consumer is to minimize your use of your cell phone. Use a landline telephone whenever you can. And if you must use a cell phone, always use earbuds and use it for as little time as possible. Don't go on and on. Have your phone call and complete it. And in general, you want to try and minimize the risk. Again, I am not a pediatrician. I'm not a doctor here. You can talk to organizations like the American Pediatrics Association, which, by the way, told the Federal Communications Commission 5 years ago that they needed to revisit this question because their standards weren't adequate. The FCC has not done that, but you can talk to them. You can talk to a group called the Environment Health Trust, and they will give you more information on this. That's
really interesting that you talk about the FCC, and they haven't done that, because the former head of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, was Tom Wheeler. In 1999, then the president of the Cellular Telecommunications and Internet Association, Thomas Wheeler, spoke to ABC News 2020. And listen carefully.
I mean, I believe that the cellular phone is safe. Our industry has gone out and aggressively asked the question, can we find a problem? And the answer that has come back is that there is nothing that has come up in the research that suggests that there is a linkage between the use of a wireless phone and health effects.
So that was, yes, Thomas Wheeler, who was President Obama's pick as FCC chair, speaking to Brian Ross on ABC. Bark Hertzgaard, can you talk about his role?
And that was a lie. That was a lie that Mr. Wheeler told. We spoke with Mr. Wheeler for this story. He gave us an interview, but insisted on putting it off the record, except for one statement that said that he followed the recommendations of the Food and Drug Administration, which had found no dangers from health phones. But what he told Brian Ross in that story, that they went out and aggressively questioned the science was their problem, that part was true. But to say that they found no such evidence, that was an absolute lie. And I use the word lie deliberately. He knew perfectly well by that time that he had been told by George Carlo, the scientist, that there were serious questions from their own $28.5 million research program. And so to me, the career of Tom Wheeler is an interesting illustration of a very old story in Washington, D.C., about how the regulatory agencies of the federal government get captured by the very industries that they are supposed to regulate. So Wheeler left the industry and later went on to head the FCC for President Obama. And in the meantime, it's gone the other way around. The FCC person, vice president at the FCC, I guess, or vice chair rather, Baker, came to now runs the Trade Association. And this is why the Harvard study on this by Norm Alster calls the FCC a captured agency. They have been captured by the industry they're supposed to regulate. And the single best example of that I can give you is the FCC does not even independently test the radiation levels on these phones. They take what the industry claims and just put it on their website. That is not good enough. Part of the reason that we're down this road all the way we are so far is that we did not test cell phones back in the 1980s before they went on the consumer market. And we're about to make that same mistake again with 5G technology.
Well, can you explain what 5G technology is?
Sure. 5G means fifth generation. And that's the next generation of the technologies that have been used for cell phones and wireless going back into the 1990s. And where people might have heard of it most is 5G technology is what will be required if we go to this thing called the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is the idea of your smartphone being connected to your smart car and your smart household so that all of your appliances, your cell phones, your computers, everything will be connected 24/7 so that you can, while you're driving home, you can turn on the oven 25 minutes from home so that it's nice and warm and you can make your dinner when you get home. That seems like it's a kind of a convenient idea perhaps, But when we did the reporting on this, my colleague Mark Dowie went to the conference of the industry and saw, and we have this picture in the Nation magazine story, saw a picture of a baby, a doll, wearing a diaper, and at the crotch of the diaper is a little transmitter. So this transmitter, under the 5G technology, Internet of Things, this transmitter will send a little message to mom or dad in the next room that, oh, the baby's diaper needs changing. Well, do we really need that? And do we really want to have radiation going from our baby's crotch to our cell phones? Why don't we just walk into the next room and check for ourselves?
In January 1993, David Reynard of Tampa, Florida, sued the NEC America company. Speaking on national TV, Reynard said his wife's NEC phone caused her lethal brain tumor. Let's go to a clip from ABC News' 2020 investigation that aired in 1999 that begins with Reynard.
Tumor was exactly in the pattern of the antenna.
David Reynard went on to almost single-handedly create a national scare when he filed a lawsuit and went public with his allegations.
Well, we're suing the carrier, we're suing the manufacturer.
There was great alarm on Wall Street, even though Reynard's lawsuit was later thrown out by a judge for a lack of reliable scientific evidence. It left the cell phone industry with a huge public relations problem.
So, Mark, could you comment on that, and also the distinction, if there is any, in terms of possible risks of using a cell phone to talk as against using it for email or for texting? Is there a difference from what you've learned about possible risks?
That's really where the wireless industry's propaganda campaign was launched. Because as Brian Ross's report just showed, they had a huge public relations problem at that point. There were congressional subcommittees beginning to investigate. The stock on Wall Street was tanking. And that's when Tom Wheeler stepped up and immediately told a hastily gathered press conference, cell phones are safe, but we're gonna revalidate that with this new science. And that was how they then found George Carlo, the scientist who they hired to do that. And it's interesting, George Carlo, I wouldn't call him a whistleblower exactly, but he certainly did not work out the way that the industry had hoped. They had hired him because he seemed like, by his own acknowledgement in our interviews with him, he seemed like an industry guy. And they thought that because he had previously done studies in which he said dioxin was not terribly harmful in small quantities. Dioxin, of course, was behind the Love Canal and the Agent Orange scandals, one of the most toxic chemicals on Earth. He had also said that breast implants were not necessarily dangerous. So George Carlo seemed like the kind of guy who would return a friendly verdict for the industry, and then he did not. And that is really where their ways parted. And Carlo eventually told the truth, both to Brian Ross and to us, and in a book, Cell Phone Radiation, if listeners want to check that out. Now, to your question, Amin, about the differences, again, I'm not a scientist here. I'm a little uncomfortable talking about that. There are plenty of places where you can go to get good information on this. I'd recommend the National Environment Trust is one. The American Pediatrics Association has also raised concerns about this. However, I do know this from sources that we've interviewed on this story, that you want to always wear earbuds if you're going to use a phone. You want to minimize your use of the phone. And yes, texting is better than a phone call in terms of the amount of radiation you're exposed to. And also, the moment of the connection of the call is when there is the biggest surge of radiation. That is, after you've dialed, you hear it ringing, and then it connects to the other phone. At that moment, hold that phone away from you. The farther away it is from your skull, the less radiation that is going to be touching you. But again, the main thing is to just limit your use of all of this to the maximum extent that you can. Use landlines when you can. You know, the world still spun on its axis. We all had our lives before there were cell phones. You can do it, folks.
I wanted to ask you about the criticism of your piece. Dr. David Gorski, a surgical oncologist of Barbara Ann Kermano's Cancer Institute, wrote a piece for his blog, Science-Based Medicine, criticizing your report. His post is headlined, "The Nation Indulges in Fear-Mongering About Cell Phones and Cancer." In it, Dr. Gorski writes, an article published last week in The Nation likens wireless telephone companies to tobacco and fossil fuel episodes in their tactics of spreading fear, misinformation, and doubt regarding the science of cell phone radiation and health. To produce this narrative, the investigation's authors rely on unreliable sources and cherry-pick scientific studies, ignoring the scientific consensus that cell phone radiation almost certainly doesn't cause cancer, all the while disingenuously claiming that they aren't taking a position on the health effects of radio waves. And Dr. Gorski continues, the idea that the radio frequency electromagnetic radiation used by cell phones and wireless networks is somehow causing horrendous health effects in humans, be it cancer, brain, breast, or other, behavioral problems, mental illness, or whatever, is like anti-vaccine pseudoscience, a claim not supported by evidence that just will not go away, says Dr. Gorski. Your response to that, Mark Hertzgaard?
Thank you, Dr. Gorski, for providing such a illuminating illustration of the very kind of disinformation campaign we're talking about here. We're not scientists, but maybe he would revisit his blog post if he looked at what the peer review of independent credentialed scientists just said last week about the National Toxicology Program's finding. They said, quote unquote, clear evidence that cell phone radiation causes cancer. We are not cherry picking. That is exactly what the biggest study ever funded by the United States government has said about this. And it was not what the government agency was trying to say. The government agency was trying to retreat from that position. It's only because of peer-reviewed scientists on the outside that we know that. Go back and read our piece and compare. To the good doctor's blog. I'm very confident that our reporting stands up.
Well, Mark, I know you have to take your daughter Kiara to school. Congratulations on her 13th birthday today. Does Kiara have a cell phone? She has a cell phone that I will say her mother gave her for my objection. Oh boy, we're not going there.
And we're not going to go there, but she is limited on the cell phone and knows that you must always use earplugs and earbuds rather, and to limit the usage. So we try and analyze it like that. And she has promised to watch this show and to read the Nation piece, and we're going to revisit all that. I understand this is something that is in every household in America. And by the way, we didn't talk about this, but they also deliberately addicted their customers to this technology. Just like the cigarette companies, the tobacco companies added nicotine to cigarettes, the wireless companies deliberately addicted people to this technology. They've admitted that. Sean Parker at Facebook talked about that in November, and they are now regretting that, some of those individuals. But the fact remains that this is a highly addictive technology. And they were told 20 years ago that this could cause cancer in kids, and they kept doing it. Think about that. Think about that.
Well, let's end with Sean Parker, who was speaking at an Axios event
in California, Southern California, the 60 hertz work that we did was supported by a contract from the Department of Energy. The radio frequency radiation work that we did was supported by Motorola. The relationship was really very cordial and very stress-free, but only up until we started generating data. These folks were very, very upset and began to talk about how are they going to handle this? What sort of spin can we put on this? What can we expect from this? And from that point on, the relationship changed. What we saw was that Motorola began to exert more and more control over the work, telling us what to do, telling us how to write abstracts, what to say in the abstracts, what to say in the papers, how to do the work. No, don't do this. Yes, do it this way. This was unacceptable. I had completed our study of DNA damage, and I submitted the final report to Motorola, and I got a call from Mays Swycord at Motorola. Now, Mays is the former head of the Center for, CDRA, Center for Devices and Radiological Health at the FDA, and he left the FDA and went to work for Motorola. Keep that connection in mind. That's interesting. He also handpicked his successor at the FDA. Anyhow, Mays didn't like the work. Then there was another phone call. Point is, I kept getting nothing from these people. They simply weren't willing to accept my interpretation of my study, my evaluation of my study, my knowledge of science at that point, and tried to urge me not to publish the study. They didn't tell me not to. They just said, no, this isn't ready for publication. And they wanted me to do more work. I stopped taking calls from them, and I went ahead and published the study. It came out in 1998, and I wanted nothing more to do with any Motorola-related work. I wasn't going to put up with that kind of control. I wouldn't put up with that attitude. That was it. I think one has to exercise caution at this point, and what makes
and bounces around and did not address the very things you asked for information on: other devices, the use of multiple devices, and physical harms other than cancer. How is that reasonable, even with the super deference you get at this stage?
We note that the exposure from each portable or mobile device near a person will generally involve low total power absorption while being highly localized and will not result in significant contributions to whole body average.
So what are you citing for that conclusion? I don't see any authority cited or any study or any explanation of how you came to that conclusion, other than that just implicit statement. The footnote.
You're correct. Well, you're correct. How did we decide that the localized exposure would be absorbed in our
multiple localized exposures for prolonged periods of time?
How that would not be harmful?
Yeah, how did you decide that?
Well, again, I think you have to link the observations here with the observations we made in concluding the notice of inquiry. You're correct. There is no footnote here, but if you go back to the resolution terminating the notice of inquiry, we said repeatedly that there was no evidence of any effect, not just cancer, any illness from radio frequency emissions below our existing levels. And in fact, we said below, at, and sometimes even above our existing
And
levels.
that one said, sorry, can you point me to that paragraph where it said, where it was addressing cumulative impacts?
Again, I apologize if I'm not being responsive to your question, but the cumulative effects are addressed here in addition to 1.13.
And you're referring back to findings that were not themselves cumulative.
No, the scientific conclusions here are cumulative. The scientific studies that the FDA and others have looked at, and
no, the FDA didn't. The FDA was only talking about cell phones. That's my point. That's fine. There could well be, it's a very big record, and you know better than me. There could very well be something where it was clear that you were relying on either your own determinations rather than just conclusions, or there's another FDA somewhere else, or another agency talked about cumulative exposures from multiple devices over a prolonged period of time for physical impacts other than cancer. And is that, you're telling me that that was made at the beginning, cumulative?
I don't know that we used the word cumulative in terminating the notice of inquiry.
Judge Robert L. Wilkins actually said, I'm going to be very upfront with why I'm inclined to rule against you.
It was reasonable for us to rely on.
Can I explain my problem? I'm just going to be very upfront with why I am inclined to rule against you. So I want you to tell me why I shouldn't have the concern that I do.
And he asks, why didn't the FDA actually request information from the committees that they have that have expertise in this area?
And you say that Congress directed the FDA to establish an electronic product radiation control program designed to protect the public health and safety from electronic product radiation. The statute that you cite there is section, it's 21 USC section 360 II. When I read that, it says that basically the way that is done is that a committee that is established in a cross-reference to 360 KK will be established that will review these standards for testing and emissions level. Okay? But you don't reference that committee anywhere, and I don't see anything about that committee mentioned in the administrative record.
And he asked questions about the interagency work group for radio frequency radiation that the United States actually, we know, used to have, but as far as we know right now has not met in 2 years.
Then later on in your brief at page 37, you say not to worry because the FCC stands ready to consider changing exposure limits in appropriate circumstances. And you refer to a radio frequency interagency working group that maintains a continuing dialogue between the FCC and the FDA about these issues. And that's referred to in a letter. Or you say that it's referred to in a letter. But when I read that letter, I don't see any mention of that working group. And I don't see anything in the record that says that working group actually exists or looked at any of the evidence in this case. So the problem that I have is that you say that you're relying on the expertise of the FDA, but the entity that Congress specifically said to review this committee, you've given us no evidence that this committee has looked at any of this. And then you say that in the future, to the extent anything needs to be looked at, it's going to be looked at by this working group. But I don't see any evidence that the working group looked at anything this time. So why shouldn't I send it back for the relevant working groups in the FDA to look at this record?
Now, this questioning to the FCC took place in the second half of the oral arguments. FCC counsel Ashley Boisel stated that there is a scientific consensus. They referred to other expert organizations and bodies, citing the World Health Organization and the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection.
So as I said, the FDA said in its letter at J8187 that it was engaged in an ongoing review of the evidence in this area. And then as you say, it represented a specific conclusion with respect to the National Toxicology Program's research on cell phones. But that was coupled with representation in our termination of the notice of inquiry at JA12 that the World Health Organization had found no substantiated adverse effects from fixed facilities. So this wasn't an inquiry that was limited narrowly.
You are way more expert than me. Is an iPad a fixed facility?
No, an iPad is not a fixed facility.
Is a watch a fixed facility? No.
Right.
Okay. Is a wireless laptop a fixed facility?
No, but
when the notice of inquiry talked about the ubiquitous use of devices, was it talking about fixed facilities?
No, not exclusively, but I was going to.
No, but I don't think that was, okay, I get that, but I
apologize.
The fixed facility stuff, to me at least, doesn't feel responsive unless I'm misunderstanding it. I'm really curious about all these other devices.
What I'm doing is referring to our explanation of why the existing limits continue to be sufficient. And what we said in terminating the notice of inquiry is that the scientific evidence, and we relied on the FDA, but we also referred to other expert organizations and bodies, that the scientific consensus had not changed. And I think it's a mistake to characterize what we did as relying exclusively on the FDA's conclusions, because that's not what we did here. We also looked to the views of, as I said, the World Health Organization at JA12, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, the National Toxicology Program. Scientists themselves said don't rely on this rat study and extrapolate to humans.
Now, I'd like to point out that the World Health Organization EMF project, which the FCC counsel Ashley Boisel is referring to, is actually, according to a published article that is in the FCC record, an entity with long-standing conflicts of interest. And Dr. Leonard Hardell's paper on the World Health Organization called A Hard Nut to Crack documents how the fact sheets that the World Health Organization has online have, I would say, less than transparent origins. And at Environmental Health Trust, we actually have been writing the World Health Organization EMF project, and we have been asking for information as to who wrote the fact sheets, what they are based on, and so forth, because these fact sheets downplay, whitewash the actual body of evidence on electromagnetic radiation, and they're used the world over as proof of safety, when in fact what we know is that the staff at the World Health Organization EMF project is actually one engineer without a medical background, and she refuses to answer our questions, try as we might, simply to know who wrote the fact sheets and how they were written. What was the process by which they were written?
In 2011, the Cancer Institute of World Health Organization, with the help of 31 experts from all around the world, classified radiofrequency radiation, including mobile phone radiation, as possibly carcinogenic. And 3 weeks later, it was very strange because the World Health Organization headquarters issued a fact sheet that dismissed the cancer risks and the cancer classification.
Whilst the IARC classification covers all radio frequencies, fact sheet 193 only refers to mobile phones. This creates the impression that the classification does not apply to other uses of radio frequencies, such as masts, Wi-Fi, DECT phones, radars, and industrial uses. But the sentence, "To date, no adverse health effects have been established as being caused by mobile phone use," fails to reflect the accumulating body of evidence. This WHO wording is strangely reminiscent of the discourse of the manufacturers who demand the highest level of scientific evidence.
Et le fait que the very fact that you can interpret the sentences contradictory, cette phrase comme contradictoire, ça veut dire that means that it's not very clear, mais even a bit misleading, un peu trompeur. Alors on a demandé, so we asked the WHO in Geneva to correct that part of the fact sheet, soit corrigé dans leur fact sheet. Mais malheureusement, but unfortunately, I've checked, the sentence is still there.
This key sentence has enabled manufacturers to deliver a message downplaying the IARC classification, which actually recognizes some tentative evidence for the increase in cancers due to exposure to radio frequencies.
I wanted to know, I asked the responsible person at the World Health Organization, Emily van Deventer, who were the experts that wrote this fact sheet, this new information that was contradicting the Cancer Institute classification, and I had no answer.
Emily van Deventer is the current head of the EMF project within the World Health Organization. In June 2006, she replaced Michael Repacholi, who she had assisted since the year 2000.
So when I met Emily van Deventer in Brussels 5 months later, I confronted her with my email, and I said I didn't never get any reply to my question, and I repeated my question. Who are the experts that you consulted and helped you write this fact sheet, and she still refused to answer to this very simple question. Who are the experts?
This one was just updated.
Yes, but who wrote it?
I am in charge of the fact sheet.
You wrote it?
The sentences.
They're updated with
a corporate fact sheet. It is not my fact sheet.
Yes, but who wrote it?
Who changes the
Yes, was it you or did you consult external
I changed
experts?
the sentence. I consulted with a number of experts.
Who were they?
And you have to ask my administration if that is an acceptable question.
Emily van Deventer has no specialist knowledge in the field of health. She is an electrical engineer with expertise in electromagnetic fields. She is a member of the IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, which originally set the international standards for public exposure to mobile phones. Emily van Deventer was a lecturer in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department of the University of Toronto in Canada. Here she carried out research financed by the telecommunications companies Bell Canada and Nortel before joining the WHO. During her public health role, Emily van Deventer remained in close contact with scientists who work for the industry. She co-wrote an article questioning the principle of precaution with some vocal defenders of the interests of electricity companies. In 2006, she joined Michael Repacholi and Peter Valberg from the product defense consultancy Gradient in signing an article supporting the theory that electromagnetic waves pose no danger to the public.
I shared with you this excerpt from the excellent film Microwave Science and Lies, which you can watch online, because there have been years of scientists and journalists asking the World Health Organization who wrote these fact sheets, which the Federal Communications Commission is actually referring to. I'm going to replay what the FCC Council states about the National Toxicology Program.
The National Toxicology Program, scientists themselves said don't rely on this rat study and extrapolate to humans.
Now, I should add that on the record is extensive documentation documenting how criticisms of the National Toxicology Program are unfounded. Telecom attorney Joe Sandry filed an amicus brief in the case with a statement by Dr. Linda Birnbaum. She's the former director of the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, the former director of the National Toxicology Program. And in her statement, she states that overall, the National Toxicology Program findings demonstrate the potential for radiofrequency radiation, and that's wireless radiation, to cause cancer in humans. Now, she also goes through the findings of the National Toxicology Program. You can read that in the amicus briefs. Please go to our website at ehtrust.org to download the briefs, download the amicus briefs, and read more. Now, what I'd like to point out is that the National Toxicology Program scientists, in all of their communique, have not said that this study doesn't apply to humans, but more specifically what they've said is you can't directly take the findings and apply to humans, which makes perfect sense. After all, humans are not rats. However, if something is affecting a rat or causing cancer in a rat, there are implications for human health. That's, after all, why this study was designed. In fact, the Food and Drug Administration asked for the National Toxicology Program to do this study. Now, the question is, why would the Food and Drug Administration ask for the National Toxicology Program to do a study on animals if it wasn't relevant for human health? And they actually state in their nomination of the for the NTP to do this research that they needed to look at animals because, of course, you can't experiment on people, and you wouldn't see rises in cancers and other effects for decades because of how long it takes to develop brain tumors and other cancerous tumors in people. The study also found DNA damage and a type of damage to heart tissue, and this was all at levels that were considered non-thermal. They didn't appreciably increase the heat. Now remember that the FCC is saying that heating is the only harm. Now, the National Toxicology Program study did find that the wireless exposure caused clear evidence of tumors in male rats. And those tumors were the same cell types as are found in case control studies in humans who have used cell phones for more than 10 years. If wireless radio frequency were a drug, we believe that it would be banned and pulled off the market by now because of all the reported side effects.
Second, we have aggregate limits that apply to fixed facilities. Those are set forth at 1.1307B3, and they require that
I'm not talking about fixed facilities. I'm talking about watches. I'm talking about iPads. Okay, those are not fixed facilities. So
sure.
And then I'm also not talking about just using a phone and holding it up to your ear. People don't use their phones, hardly use them for phone calls anymore. They're constantly in the hand, not 2 centimeters away. They're constantly in the hand, and the fingers are constantly on them. And so I'm just trying to understand how the FDA coming back and talking about cell phones that are in a holster, or nobody keeps them anymore, or are in a purse, they're not being used. Is it all, and looking only at cancer, is it all relevant to an inquiry, again, into the effect of this radiation frequency from multiple devices that are used in entirely different ways now, an entirely different volume, and throughout the population, including children who live on iPads?
Judge Millett is speaking about the way cell phones are tested, as if they were in a holster, which of course we don't do that anymore. Remember, we used to walk around with a phone and a little clip on the belt, and there was a space between the phone and the body.
So we explained in that paragraph that exposure from mobile and portable devices tends to be more localized exposure when they're held close to the body. That would cover things like a watch or a tablet held in the hand or a cell phone. And that exposure, because it's more localized, it tends to doesn't need to be aggregated because the whole body exposure is much more diffuse. So we addressed the fact that
what other expert agency is the one that addressed that for you?
We were making that judgment in our own technical expertise that the effect of these emissions was not significant in the aggregate, and that therefore there didn't need to be any kind of aggregate limit. But with respect to our reliance, pardon me?
How did you decide? I mean, these things are strapped onto the arms and in the hands, significant part of the day. How was it that you decided that that was not a significant change from what you had looked at in 1996?
Well, there are no substantial adverse effects from exposures at the existing levels. So the fact that they're strapped on the wrist.
And how did you find that? Is this for your 2.5 centimeter test?
Well, no. What I'm doing is referring to our explanation of why the existing limits continue to be sufficient.
When she talks about how phones are constantly in the hand and not centimeters away, what she's talking about is how, I believe, something that we raised in our brief, which is that the way phones are tested at a distance from a body dummy do not reflect the way that we use devices, because of course people carry phones in their pockets, touching their body, in their jeans pockets, in their bra, in their tight spandex pants. Babies are handed cell phones as toys. They're basically hugging them. We have virtual assistants that they have near their beds. Their heads are near them. Teenagers are on their phones 24 hours a day. For teenagers, a cell phone may as well be an appendage. I mean, it's like another hand they have. They could never put it down. Newborns are exposed to cell phones because the parents are using cell phones constantly. And of course, this is not just about cell phones, but about Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and the wireless devices, the billions of devices that make up the wireless Internet of Things being marketed to us nonstop. And it saturated our lives, every inch of our life, day and night, and every age group, from pregnancy to babies, toddlers, kids, teenagers, adults, and the elderly. There has been no review by any U.S. health and safety agency that has looked at all of the research.
We formally solicited the views of other entities with expertise in this area. We made very clear that we wanted to rely on them. We relied on the views of expert agencies in adopting these limits in the first place, and no federal agency
Did
or
you
body.
solicit these committees or did you just solicit the FDA?
We at JA 165 of the notice of inquiry, we said we formally seek the input of all of the expert bodies in this area. And we left the docket open for 7 years, giving ample opportunity to weigh in, and not one of these bodies said you need to change your standards. And we're not arguing that silence should be construed as endorsement, but it shouldn't be construed as disapproval of the agency's existing limits. I think even if you construe it as neutral, all of the representations that we did receive, and again, the FDA it's undisputed that
You
the
want
FDA
us to construe it as deliberation, that silence should be construed as these relevance committees actually deliberated, actually reviewed the record and studies. So you are asking us to infer something that's significant.
Well, all that we're asking you to infer is what the Second Circuit and Cellular Phone Task Force said was reasonable, which was for us to presume that the agencies and bodies charged with staying on top of this area and regulating in this area and paying attention to the science in this area have done so. And yes, we're asking that you presume that the agencies with responsibility in this area,
even when the report that they send back doesn't reference, lots of relevant studies and lots of relevant issues, we still presume that they reviewed those studies and those issues.
Yes, I think it's reasonable for the FCC to presume that they did. As I said, the FDA referred to its ongoing monitoring activities and confirmed its responsibility in this area. And I don't think that there's any requirement that the FCC wait for this committee to speak as a committee, that it can't rely on the FDA's representations about the state of the science. Again, this committee is created in the FDA's operating statute and appears in the section right after FDA has been anointed the agency with responsibility in this area. And under the—
You can't tell me whether that committee even exists or whether the committee reviewed anything having to do with this petition.
I can't, sitting here. I don't have any personal knowledge about that committee. I do know, as I said—
Why shouldn't that bother the court?
Well, again, because the FDA weighed in. It's statutorily directed to be the responsible agency in this area. And I think the FDA, we know it does have primary jurisdiction over public health. I don't know that every other member of that committee does, but they are certainly well equipped to evaluate the science and make a representation about the sufficiency of the radio frequency emission limits. I mean, one other point, the FDA regulates in this area. They are responsible for promulgating the radio frequency emission levels for devices that the FCC doesn't regulate. So again, this is an important part of their mandate. And just as we relied on expert agencies in adopting the limits, it was reasonable to do so here. Just one more point on this. As I said at the outset, we weren't writing on a blank slate here. In 1996, we adopted these limits and we had the input of the FDA, the EPA, OSHA, and IOSH. So these limits don't reflect the views exclusively of the FDA. It was a considered and lengthy deliberative rulemaking, and none of them weighed in to say that they needed to be changed.
And we document in our brief that actually sister agencies are not in agreement about keeping FCC limits. We have a letter from the EPA, we have information from the National Cancer Institute, where they say that they don't even make safety determinations. And we have a letter from the Department of Interior pointing out research showing impacts to birds. The judges really queried, why was the FCC making each statement that they made? And here's a clip where the judge asked, who are you citing? How did you make that determination?
Well, I think that there's nothing in the statute that suggests that the committee has to speak through the committee. I think that the FDA, as the agency charged with keeping abreast of the science in this area, can speak to the state of the science, and it does refer to its ongoing monitoring activities and its letter to the FCC at J8187. And this is extra record material, and we're not relying on it for you to uphold the agency's decision, but the FDA did release a review of the scientific evidence in 2020, and its conclusions were consistent with the conclusions that the to do so, and I think that's what the court and cellular phone task force said.
It didn't have, no, and in fact, I mean, in our case, we specifically noted that what could make a difference is if circumstances change. We have that and the circumstances could change over time, then there would need to be another look. And that was, you all flagged in your notice of inquiry was things have changed, including the ubiquity and multiplicity of devices.
These oral arguments really call out what's happening, not just in the United States, but all around the world, where when this issue is raised, people are told there is no evidence of harm. We repeatedly hear in the news media and by politicians that there is no evidence of any effects of harm from radio frequency radiation wireless, be it from cell phones, Wi-Fi, cell towers, and all these wireless devices that are coming out now with 5G and the Internet of Things. We are told there is no evidence. But what is that based on? Who has made that determination? And the judges in this case really got to the heart of the issue. They wanted to know, how did you make that statement? You know, they asked the FCC, how did you come to the determination that there is no evidence of any effects? Especially when it comes to cumulative effects from long-term exposure to hours and hours of low-level exposure to radio frequency radiation. The judges clearly read the briefs because they point out that the FDA is only talking about cell phones. The FDA is not dealing with cell towers or all kinds of wireless devices and networks that we have in our lives today. I mean, what about smart cars? The FDA doesn't deal with smart cars and all the technology in cars, or smart meters, which are rapidly being put on homes across the nation for energy, as well as gas and other utilities. Our case is not just about cell phones. It is about wireless radio frequency radiation, which comes from numerous sources. Now, in this clip, the issue of the 50 times safety factor is raised. We address this extensively in our brief. There is no 50 times safety factor for several reasons. First, even if there were a 50 times safety factor, a factor of what? The basis for our limits is about thermal heating. So even if that were the only harm, even if heating were the only harm, making a 50 times safety factor from a level set to protect against heating doesn't protect us, because our entire case is about the fact that there is an extensive record of research showing impacts that are non-thermal, that are at very low levels of radio frequency radiation. And you can listen to the judge query the FCC counsel on this in this clip.
And what we know is that at 4 watts per kilogram, we start to observe thermal changes. There are no substantiated adverse effects below that level. And as it is, our standards incorporate a substantial safety margin. They're 50 times safer than that 4 watts per kilogram.
We're looking for thermal effects, but non-thermal, not looking for non-thermal effects, right?
We're not, the limits address both kinds of effects, because the only substantiated adverse effects are thermal ones. And we acknowledged evidence on the other side. We acknowledged that much of the record was not scientific. That which purported to constitute research evidence lacked any persuasive case as to its value or significance. We acknowledged 3 of the 4 major studies that petitioners rely on in their brief, and explained why they didn't provide any basis to reevaluate our limits. And again, going back to
towards the end of oral argument, Judge Henderson requested that the FCC provide documentation on the Technical Electrical Committee of the FDA, as well as the Radio Frequency Interagency Work Group.
I'd be happy to answer other questions of the panel.
I do have one. How difficult would it be to determine whether these committees and working groups exist?
I could easily.
Well, I mean, are they set up by regulation, or that's my question. Is it a question you can answer with some sort of supplemental submission?
Yes. It is a factual question, and it's certainly one that we can answer in a supplement if the panel is interested.
Ms. Boiselle, can you get whatever information there is about the formation of these committees and working groups we've been talking about, and submit it? Well, let's say that should be fairly easy. It's either there or they either exist or they don't. Let's say by 5 o'clock tomorrow, and then Mr. McCulloch, let's see. I don't know that there'd be anything to respond to, because they either exist or they don't, but why don't you take another 24 hours if you have anything you want to submit in response?
On January 26th, the FCC submitted to the court a response to Judge Henderson's request. In their response, they document that the Electronics Committee consists of 15 members who have not met since 2016, and that there are 10 current vacancies on that committee. In addition to factual information, the FCC response actually adds an argument in their latest response. For example, they say that no statute or regulation required them to seek out the views of the technical committee. Regarding the Radio Frequency Radiation Work Group, the FCC attaches a charter indicating that representatives from the FDA, FCC, Environmental Protection Agency, National Cancer Institute, National Institute on Occupational Safety and Health, National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, National Telecommunications and Information Administration, and Occupational Safety and Health Administration are involved, at least according to the charter dated 2012. I need to add here that recently I had an email exchange with the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States, and I specifically asked about the Radio Frequency Interagency Work Group. On July 8th, 2020, I received a response from Lee Ann B. Veal, the director of the Radiation Protection Division at the Environmental Protection Agency. I specifically asked who the staff member of the Environmental Protection Agency was on this work group. The response I received from the Environmental Protection Agency in 2020 was, the Radio Frequency Interagency Work Group is an informal forum for exchange of information and the group does not meet to set or advise on policy, rulemaking, or guidance. The group has not met in more than 2 years. And when I asked about what U.S. agency has reviewed the research on damage to trees or damage to memory or impacts on birds and bees, we received the same response, and that was that the Environmental Protection Agency does not have a funded mandate for radio frequency matters, and that they are not aware of any EPA reviews that have been conducted on the topic of trees as well as birds and bees. And the EPA also said that their last review related to impacts to human biology was in 1984. The FCC submission also says that, as the court has recognized, the views of the work group do not represent the official policy or position of member agencies. In response to the FCC, Environmental Health Trust and petitioners submitted on January 27th a document which we have posted on our website at ehtrust.org along with all of the other documents discussed in this case. We actually contend that the FCC's January 26th letter exceeds the scope of the information requested by the court at oral argument. We and petitioners ask the court to disregard all of the arguments in Section 1 of the FCC's letter in its entirety. The last sentence of our submission, which again is online at ehtrust.org, states, "The FDA and Dr. Sherm were free to ask for input from this committee," referring to the Technical Electronic Product Radiation Safety Standards Committee, but apparently did not do so. We cannot thank you enough for your support of our historic case against the Federal Communications Commission. We have an excellent legal team well-versed in the issue of the Administrative Procedures Act and the National Environmental Policy Act, which are two key laws that we are addressing in our lawsuit. And they have put in a tremendous effort, and they have gone above and beyond in this case. Please stay in touch. Make sure that you're signed up for our newsletter at ehtrust.org. If you want to know what we're up to, please join us. Thank you.
Did you know that cell phone, the one in your pocket, emits radio frequency radiation? As long as your phone's turned on, even if you're not talking or texting. The American Academy of Pediatrics in over a dozen countries recommends reducing children's exposure to wireless radiation. When using a cell phone, I always keep it away from my body. I use speakerphone or a headset like this. To stop microwave exposure, I put my phone on airplane mode and turn off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth function.
I hold the phone at a distance and make sure it's not touching my body.
Cell phones are not toys. Children's brains and bodies are still developing and are vulnerable to wireless radiation. Practice safe and responsible habits with yourself and your children. When using the computer, I always try to make sure my connection is corded, not wireless. Remember not to use your cell phone in the car. The phone works at higher power in metal surroundings and bounces around, increasing your family's radiation exposure. For their safety, for your safety.
Because children are more vulnerable.
Remind them, remind yourself to limit your microwave radiation exposures.
Probably the most important thing I did, I was involved as a young scientist in the committee that actually reviewed the data and recommended that there be no smoking on airplanes. You may be shocked to hear that it was even a question for science at the time, but it was. And when I look at what we know now about mobile phone radiation, I see some very interesting similarities.
Growing number of prominent doctors and scientists are raising warning flags over radiation this morning, and your kids could be facing a greater risk of exposure.
I think the most important study is the study of the National Toxicology Program. In a classic large carcinogenicity test, one of the largest ever performed, and for that matter, one of the most expensive, they found increased risk of the tumors which we believe radiofrequency radiation is causing in man. Particular tumors called schwannomas. In the rats, they were in the heart. In humans, they're often in the nerve, the ear nerve, the vestibular nerve.
Cell phone providers say they follow all safety guidelines put into place by the FCC. The current FCC safety standard was developed nearly 20 years ago.
The manufacturers actually tell people in the instruction manual, which I've never read, not to put the cell phone against your ear.
it does say exactly that. There's the BlackBerry, for example, warns to keep your phone at least 0.98 inches away from the body when transmitting. With an iPhone, for example, it's 5/8 of an inch.
At this point, the evidence has become sufficiently strong that cell phone radiation is a human carcinogen.
A major development from California's Department of Public Health, high use of cell phones may be linked to certain types of cancer and other health effects, including brain cancer and tumors, lower sperm counts, headaches, and effects on learning, memory, hearing, behavior, and sleep.
If it was a real problem, I would know. If it was a real problem, the government would protect us. How come I'm not hearing about this? They're all things I've heard when I give seminars. I get up there and they say, oh yeah, this is really a problem. They would have told us. I am a legitimate scientist, and I am telling you.
Because the signals don't affect everybody the same way.
I'm here in Brussels to attend conference on electrical hypersensitivity and multiple chemical sensitivity. And the reason that we're holding this conference is because there are so many people suffering from environmental illness. And it's important to get the scientific community together with the medical community so that we can help people recover from electrical hypersensitivity.
My background is as a neuroscientist. I've studied the central and peripheral nervous system. We had struggled for many years to get some form of answer to the simple question: the person with electro hypersensitivity, what is he or she?
This Congress is trying to raise awareness among healthcare practitioners because so few of them recognize environmental sensitivities, and very often people are misdiagnosed as having psychological problems rather than physiological responses to environmental stressors.
If I ask you how much more such radiation does penetrate your body today compared to like 10 years ago, is it twice as much? 3 times as much? No, it's a quintillion times more. That's a 1 with 18 zeros. It's a quintillion times more. That's a 1 with 18 zeros.
A lot of questions that were raised about the safety of tobacco on airplanes. And they were, in fact, legitimate questions, things we did not know. There are a lot of important questions to be asked about mobile phone radiation today, without any doubt. But the reality is we're not asking those questions. And with the exception of some researchers here and elsewhere, very little new research is being done in this field. So it's a thrill to be here because Australia has been a leader in research in the field of electrical engineering and its applications to medicine, doing some of the most exciting work in the world and funded by institutions around the world, including the US Department of Defense. And I've worked at some of the top institutions in the world in science. And so when I first thought there could be something wrong with mobile phones, I actually owned 3 phones at the time. I own 2 now. And everybody has to downsize a bit. And I didn't believe there was a problem. And I thought if there were a problem, I would know about it because of course I knew all about what's important in science. Well, I was wrong. I liked the fact that I could call people or actually send them messages and expect an answer at all hours of the day, and found it kind of fun in the beginning. And when somebody said to me there could be a problem with this with our health, I said, oh, don't be ridiculous. If there was a problem, I'd know about it. Well, I was wrong. And what I now know is that information is being sent to people routinely to give them safety information. I'm going to ask you to help me out here by looking at how many of you have an iPhone. Now, I assume you didn't all turn them off. So, for those of you who have an iPhone, would you not raise your hand again? I'd like you to share with your colleagues. So please go to the settings on your phone, right? Please take a moment and nod when you've got there. all right? And be prepared to share, all right? Go to settings on the phone. Got there? All right. Now, get to settings. Now go to about. I'm sorry, you have to go to general first. There's a mistake here. You have to go to general. All right? Under general, under settings. Then go to about, which is at the top. You got there? About? Yes? Okay. Now you have to scroll all the way down to something you don't normally see, called legal. You got to legal? All right. Now click on RF exposure. Now you can read it later, but it's basically telling you that you need to know that you can not keep the phone directly next to your body without exceeding the as tested exposure guidelines. And by the way, the iPhone does it. I happen to know how to find it on the iPhone. I'm just learning the Android system myself. But all smartphones come with some information that basically says, don't keep the phone in your pocket or you will exceed the as tested exposure guidelines. Now, how many of you knew that before today? Well, this is a very well-informed audience relative to others.
Not sufficiently. If one can, thank you, Chairman Bukes and members of the committee. Good evening. I'm here to explain in 7 minutes radiation from cell phones and cell phone towers, like all forms of electromagnetic radiation, penetrate into the body, may damage cells, and potentially cause disease. But first, let me preface my talk by stating that I'm a practicing board-certified diagnostic radiologist, who, like all radiologists, trained in radiation physics. I spend my days interpreting the images created by exposing the human body to different forms of radiation. In healthcare, radiation can be used to treat and diagnose disease like cancer that can also cause disease and is therefore tightly regulated. Following are some pictures and videos I'd like to present to make a point. This is a chest x-ray. We are able to obtain this image because x-rays produced by an x-ray machine penetrate through the patient's chest and expose a plate on the opposite side of the body. X-rays are a form of electromagnetic radiation. In this image, you can see the finger glowing red when it is placed on a bright light. This is because light, like X-rays, can penetrate through the body's tissues. Light is a form of electromagnetic radiation. By placing a body in a strong magnetic field and subjecting it to pulses of radiofrequency radiation, we were able to get images like this one from an MRI of the shoulder. This technology is possible because both magnetic fields and radiofrequency radiation, just like light and X-rays, penetrate through the body and affect atoms and molecules. Now, this graphic depicts the continuum of frequencies that comprise the electromagnetic spectrum, and I placed the 3 images in the respective frequency bands. Microwaves and millimeter waves produced by the 5G network are demarcated by this sun. These frequencies also penetrate into the body. As you know, there are 3 bandwidths of frequency in the 5G network. The highest frequency band includes frequencies between 20 and 40 gigahertz. A meter recently became available to the public for the high frequency band detection. I'm going to show you a couple of brief videos demonstrating the use of this detector. I took these videos with my cell phone in airplane mode, and there were no other sources of 5G radiation and no Wi-Fi in the house. Now, if you look at this first video, which was taken in an interior room, you'll see the green indicator light is on, and the display reads less than 5 microwatts per meter squared. This is background. In this next video, you can see outside the front door of this home, there is a pole-mounted 5G small cell across the street. If I take a detector and I turn on the volume, you can see that the radiation emitted from this small cell is erratic but continuous. The maximum tower density coming from the antenna on this front stoop is over 10,000 microwatt per meter squared. In this final video, you see radiation exposure one would receive in a 3rd floor bedroom with the window closed while lying on the bed. You can still hear the detectors picking up radiation, and while lying in bed, the person is still receiving a dose or power density of over 700 microwatts per meter squared. All forms of electromagnetic radiation penetrate the body. Some frequencies penetrate deeper than others. Unfortunately for all of us, and I do mean all of us, government regulations are still based on research performed by Hermann Schwann, a distinguished scientist who in 1953 said that heating effects should be used to determine safety limits for microwave radiation. I remember my father telling me when he was in college in 1953, he had heard over the cafeteria loudspeaker that Watson and Crick had discovered DNA. Yes, we've learned a lot since 1953. One of those things is that non-thermal effects occur in the body from non-ionizing radiation. Scientific studies have repeatedly shown that exposure to radio frequency radiation can cause individual cells in the body to become stressed. The longer a cell is stressed, the greater the likelihood it may malfunction. You might think that the term stress implies a manageable state and that it's not a big deal. But let me clarify. Stress weakens the body's tissues. Just as stress can cause a bridge to collapse, stress can cause a bone to fracture, an ulcer to develop, or an organ system to fail. When cells undergo stress, unfortunate things can happen. Membranes which protect the cell and control the cell's internal environment can become damaged, causing the cell to lose its ability to function and put the cell's life at risk. The cell's mitochondria can become damaged and produce less energy and run less efficiently. If one continues to eat the same amount, but his or her cells can't use that food efficiently, they will gain weight and become obese. Proteins in the stressed cell can become damaged and denatured. This may sound esoteric, but consider that many diseases now common in our population, like Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body dementia, and amyloidosis, are all associated with protein denaturation. And importantly, when the cell is stressed, its DNA can become damaged, which can lead to mutations and possibly cancer. The impact of malfunctioning cells on one's clinical health status is determined by which cells and organs are damaged. If the thyroid gland is damaged, one will have clinical manifestations from abnormal thyroid function, including increased risk for cardiac arrhythmia. If radiation exposure affects white blood cells, it can cause immune dysfunction, making one more susceptible to disease. If the brain is affected, one may experience confusion, memory loss, ringing in the ears, vertigo, insomnia, and other symptoms. If a man's testicles are exposed, testosterone levels can drop, and sperm can become damaged, lose motility, and experience DNA fragmentation. Yes, there are many, many more examples of health effects associated with exposure to radiofrequency radiation described in the literature, and these conditions are becoming more and more prevalent as technology becomes more pervasive. One final point. I've heard it mentioned that the high-frequency band of 5G doesn't or shouldn't penetrate more than a few millimeters into the skin. Whether or not this is true, the thyroid gland is often only a few millimeters deep to the skin surface, and so are the testicles. Interfering with the function of these glands can cause systemic endocrine dysfunction, and in addition, many important cells, including red blood cells and immune cells, are just below the skin surface. Radiation doesn't need to go deep to cause damage. Thank you.
Well, that's a lot to take in. So more AI, more 5G, going on to 6G. Children absorb 10 times more microwave radiation. You have an outdated safety guideline that never even looked at the impact of children or pregnant women or environmental factors. They only looked at thermal effects. And this can all be tested, as you've just seen. And then there's more. Mercury released from tooth fillings, Dr. Magna Havis, as well as the study that I'll put inside the chat. So we didn't look at the accumulated effects, but I went through that with Brock. And there's a lot of different variables. electric vehicle for people in the car, all with cell phones. Cell phone towers, 5G need to be close together. So every so many feet, whatever that number is, going over an electric charged road and then having, say, 8 cars surrounding the center car, left, right, front, back, both corners. What's the accumulated effects? If we look at Silent Guardian or Active Denial System made by Rayon, the military defense company, we're getting into weaponized frequencies. I went over that with a different Grok chat. AI glasses, VR glasses, and being pushed and implicated into schools. The brain's not even fully developed. You just heard all that from a court case. So we need to do something. I feel that these companies owe us the UBI to wean us off of this. More later, but there you go. There's no conspiracy. There's no untestable scenario. With that meter that guy just got done using, it's a little bit over $1,000. Or you can get a specialist over at buildingbiologist.org. And you can get a shielding canopy if you have a sick child. Because you've seen what that number was. 700. That's ridiculous. And we didn't get a chance to tie in the rest, like Martin Paul's work on EMF, the major cause of autism. We didn't include Sam Milham in all his work. Peter Sullivan, Clear Light Ventures. It's in one of my Grok chats. Autism One, he was a speaker there. He had some autistic children and reduced EMF and dirty electricity. We didn't even get into the dirty electricity part. But yeah, smart meter on your house and smart devices. This is the AI doom scenario. What it rides on. So I thought it could be done with a thermal image camera, but according to Grok, it can't be done. But it can be done with the same thing that they use to show that children absorb 10 times more microwave radiation. And it can be done live. I don't know how much that machine costs, but children are still using their phones. It's not like you're doing a human experiment, but you are. But don't feel guilty at all. We were pushed. This was pushed on us. President from Facebook even admitted on a feedback loop they knew it, and pushing it on a electronic device, your phone, knowing that your device is going to make someone hooked on your app, and you must exceed the safety guidelines, which they should know. If they're putting their app on a device, they should know the safety limits of that device. The company that makes the phone and the above page legal knows how far you need to be away. That app should be liable to put on there. If you use this app, you are going to exceed the safety guideline. So when you look at microwave pulsation and this feedback loop, you can increase that feedback loop with microwave radiation. I would refer that to Barry Trower, the microwave weapons expert, former MI6 agent. He was backed up by Dr. Magna Havas, as well as Martin Paul, and I think a few others. But his 10 case study, Dr. Klinkert, nitrogen Klinkert. It's a 10K study, and he has numbers over there that you could easily reproduce. And it was done on 900 megahertz cordless phone, dirty electricity, and just a sleeping area. And he could determine the percentage of someone having an autistic child based on those levels. Those levels are far beyond what this study was. And the mercury release from tooth fillings, that's a big key one because that was done on a 900 megahertz phone at 30 centimeters away. So if you're doing a wearable or a AI glasses, VR glasses, a watch, plus a cell phone, plus an e-vehicle, the towers. I don't really want to miss them all, but there's so many of them. According to Dr. Barry Trower, they go for short, close to, or multitude of the bandwidth. So if there's a child in the area where high microwaves are, the microwaves are going to go for the smaller or shortest, closest to the bandwidth. That's pretty messed up if it's true. But the 10 times more microwave radiation that they absorb, that's over environmental health drugs. They have a whole paper on that. And you can see it in their model on their device that they use for testing for cell phones. Yeah. We're an electrical chemical being. If you get a chance, please check out Sam Milham's book, Dirty Electricity. I'll put it into the whole narrative of what you should get out of this. His was on the electrification of civilization and disease. So this is another form of it. And John C. Lilly, the Lilly Wave, and Patrick Flanagan, the Neuropoem.